Today's episode is brought to you by We Break You Buy. Interested in sports cards and memorabilia? Check out We Break You Buy on TikTok. We Break You Buy is a small operation run by three brothers, offering spots for a chance at winning some incredible sports cards and memorabilia. That's We Break You Buy. Check it out today on TikTok. Another edition of Why Wasn't It Better? I am your host, Patrick Darms.
And I am your co-host, Anton Paras.
We have a return guest who has not been with us for quite some time, making his second appearance on the podcast, Garret Ohringer. Welcome back to the podcast.
Garret.
Thank you. And to clarify for the record, I have been here, like on the earth, literally here, just not on this podcast.
Actually, we reanimated him just for the podcast.
Right. Yep. I didn't turn into a giant fart cloud like Nick Nolte did at the end of the movie we'll be eventually talking about later today. I've been a physical being on this earth still, I promise.
That's good. I, too, have thoughts on the cloud fight. The last time you were here, Garret, we talked about another disappointing superhero film from 2003, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And we had so much fun talking about it that we decided that you would have to come back for another disappointing superhero film from 2003. It's The Hulk. Or should I just say Hulk?
Yeah, it's Hulk 2003. And Ang Lee would not be probably approving if you didn't get that title right if you met him in person. But he probably wouldn't want to talk about this movie, I would imagine, in person. But hey, I don't know. He seems like a cool guy from everything I've seen.
He does. He seems genuinely proud of this.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, Anton, you'll probably talk all about him being in the mocap suit, but the guy not only directed this, but basically was it. So that's kind of directing to the X degree, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not surprised to see that Ang Lee is proud of his work, because whether you like it or not, this was a very Ang Lee movie in terms of how it characterized just relationships, despite the fact it was a superhero film and it was a little bit out of the box from when we think of superhero films today. But I think we're touching on a lot of the topics that we want to go into. But before we dive in, Pat, is there any admin that we want to go over before we start having some fun with this film?
There is. The most important admin of all. I will be right back because my wife locked herself out of the house.
What a mystery.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Is this
the most important admin?
Is this the work of Hulk's enemy, the Absorbing Man?
The Absorbing Man, a.k.a. David Banner, a.k.a. It's so funny, by the way, that his name is David Banner. Like, it's so because that's all I can hear in my head.
It's interesting because David Banner was the name of the Hulk in the TV series.
Was it?
Yeah, he didn't go by Bruce Banner. For whatever reason, they named him David Banner.
Isn't his dad's name also like Brian Banner?
His dad's name's Brian Banner. So for whatever reason, they changed it up.
I need a family tree drawing right now.
It would be a very so in the original, what was it? The
Bruce Bixby series.
70s, the 70s series, his name's David Banner, just for whatever reason.
I want to know what the theories behind the producers were. You're like, you know what? I knew a guy named Bruce, and screw that guy. His name's David.
Yeah, Bruce. That name carries too much baggage. Let's just name him David.
Okay, crisis averted.
But yeah, David Banner, the rapper.
That's right.
I remember
he is a
that
rapper.
Song Play from 2005, which was mildly like a softcore porn video, and my parents saw me watching it on like MTV2, and they were just like, absolutely not. Yeah.
I'm quite fond of his work on the Too Fast, Too Furious soundtrack. He composed and performed the song Like a Pimp, which is the opening track that you hear to that film. Not really sure why I remember that, but there you go.
If you're a fan of David Banner, you can also use you can also use him in the Def Jam Fight for New York video game, which is a fighter, of course. So you can have him fight against Snoop Dogg or any other rapper that's also featured in Fight for New York.
You know who has that video game on PlayStation 2 sitting in his apartment right now? The one and only Garret Ohringer somehow convinced his parents to buy that game for him when he was 14. So here we are.
Wonderful. Anton, I don't really have any admin. I think our listeners know the admin at this point. If you like us, follow us. That's my admin.
My only thing, I'm not watching football or I don't want to see anything football until the fall. That's it. And
see,
I don't think you have any opportunities to. Isn't the season over?
Well, there's all the off-season stuff like the draft but I'm just not into it. I'm
Anton,
fine.
I'm really sorry. I was pulling for the 49ers, but hey, be miserable with me, a Jets fan.
Yeah, let's do it. So what do we do? Do we go buy some like pretzels and eat our sorrows away? Or?
Yeah, you buy pretzels and you call into Sports Talk Radio at 3 a.m. to yell at some guy from Long Island and tell him why you think Aaron Rodgers is the answer to everything. And then you have a screaming match.
Yeah, my cousin from Jericho, New York knows a thing or two about football, so let me tell you.
Oh, let me tell you. First time, long time, let me tell you.
But yes, we'll just leave it at that. But Garrett, before we dive in, wanted to make sure to give any of our guests the opportunity to promote or just give any shout outs before we dive in. So is there anything you'd like to give a shout out for?
Yeah, I want to give a shout out to this podcast called Why Wasn't It Better? You guys should totally listen to it and follow. Heard it was really good. And yeah, I don't know. They have some cool guests on it sometimes too. I think your followers should totally check it out too. Also would like to say tax season is coming up, so everybody get that done early and hope everybody gets sweet refunds too. So friendly reminder to do your taxes and listen to a podcast called Why Wasn't It Better?
PSA. Very responsible advice. Yeah. Thank you.
PSA and pleasing the people. Love it.
See, that's what I'm here for, satisfying both sides of the coin. That's what I'm here to do.
All right, then. Well, this is the beginning of what is going to be a double feature. We experimented with this last season when we covered Thunderball and Never Say Never Again back to back. So this week, it's 2003's Hulk, and next week you will be hearing The Incredible Hulk, which is the quasi-related, quasi-sequel, quasi-reboot, whatever MCU version of this movie that they decided to make 5 years later. But we'll get into that masterpiece when we discuss that. So as of now, it's 2003's Hulk. Bruce Banner, a genetics researcher with a tragic past, suffers an accident that causes him to transform into a raging green monster when he gets angry. Meanwhile, forces conspire against him, hoping to weaponize his unique powers for the military. Hulk was released on June 20th, 2003 by Universal Pictures and Valhalla Motion Pictures, directed by Ang Lee, screenplay by James Sheamus, Michael France, and John Turman, starring Eric Bana, Jennifer Connelly, Sam Elliott, Nick Nolte, Josh Lucas, and no one else. The budget was $137 million, that is $228 million adjusted for inflation, and the box office was only $245 million. That is $408 million adjusted for inflation. Garrett, as today's guest, why did you want to talk about Hulk?
Honestly, those budget numbers, my first question was, why not give it more money? Secondly, I really wanted to talk about this film because I remember absolutely loving it as a kid. Growing up, I thought Hulk was the coolest character in all of the Avengers. I had the Hulk hands as a kid and everything like that too. I remember being so excited for this video game on the GameCube also. And then I remember watching the movie, and that was one of the times that, I was like, maybe this movie isn't that great, but I was just blindly just loving it. And then when you guys told me what episodes you had coming up and mentioned the Hulk, I was like, I love that movie. I think it's great. How could it be better? And then I rewatched it, and in fact, there are a lot of reasons why it wasn't better too. So I am here to talk about a lot of the themes and a lot of the, let's just call it the dichotomy of the movie that was on the screen and that should have been made, a la Bruce Banner and the Hulk 2, or should I say Bruce Krenzler. And also because I genuinely think this is better than 2008, The Incredible Hulk, and I would have just been too angry during that. So, pick the lesser of two evils, if you want to say it.
Okay, excellent.
Makes a lot of sense. Anton, let's travel back in time.
Okay.
To 2003, the spring of 2003. Yeah, this is a movie season that we're familiar with. We've covered The Matrix Reloaded. We've covered Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines. And of course, with Garret, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Superhero films in 2003 were at a curious experimental phase, would you say?
Yep, very fair to say. We touched on that.
Yeah, we had the first couple of X-Men films had been out by this point. We had the first Spider-Man film the year before this. Superhero fans, like the both of you, were thrilled that an auteur director like Ang Lee was going to be directing a Hulk movie. I remember hearing about this at the time and being pretty excited for it. I'm like, oh, Ang Lee. He had just given us Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. This was a very big deal for this type of director to be doing this type of film, would you say?
Oh, huge. I mean, I'll definitely share that at this time, I didn't have the capacity to respect Ang Lee for his directorial contributions, but Ang Lee, just amazing director with a very well-respected filmography.
Can I just tell a quick Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon story that I promise serves this podcast? So my parents, big film buffs too, were very excited when that movie was coming out, and they took me, at the time 9 years old, to see it in theaters too. I had never seen any movie with subtitles or anything like that, at least in theaters. And I remember sit down, credits start rolling, and I was like, wow, this movie looks super cool. And then there's subtitles throughout the whole movie. And I whispered to my mom, which as a 9-year-old whispers is not actually a real term. I basically scream out, I have to read during this entire movie, which caused the entire theater to tell me to shut up, you little kid, which has really stuck in my brains a lot. And anytime I see a foreign movie now with my parents, which still happens a good amount, they remind me of that story too and like to tell it to everybody in the theater. So thank you, Mom and Dad. Shouts out to you for reminding me that I embarrassed myself having to read in a theater as a 9-year-old boy. Anyway, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon rules. Thank you for letting me tell my digression real quick.
Thank you.
Did you happen to see the sequel?
That's a hard capital N no.
Okay, because we're covering that very soon.
Oh God, do I have to watch it? Is it bad? It doesn't look good. It really looked just a pale imitation.
Well, it wasn't anything like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, I'll tell you that.
You're like, it's a movie.
I don't think it's horrible, but revisiting it for the podcast, having to do the research already, it's pretty fascinating to get into it.
Ooh. Okay. All right. I feel like that's a movie I feel like I'd much more rather learn about than actually watch, if that makes sense.
It does. It's fair.
Yeah.
It's fair. Well, speaking of subtitles, I had to watch this film with subtitles whenever Nick Nolte was on screen because I couldn't understand anything he was saying with his mumbling. I
read a great quote from The Atlantic's David Sims that basically said he looks like a man made out of vodka, which also makes a lot of sense at the time.
Nick Nolte's character actually was the same exact character that they use in Tropic Thunder.
That is a great call.
Payback. Beds give me nightmares. Well, as far as the other star in this film, right, Eric Bana, he was a promising star at the time, right? This was going to be his first really starring role in Hollywood after breaking out in Black Hawk Down a couple years before this. And then Jennifer Connelly was hot off her Academy Award-winning performance in A Beautiful Mind and just hot in general.
AKA the object of my desire from like ages 9 through now.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't think that's a hot take.
No, very mild, that's for sure.
Well, yeah, there was really a lot of hype for this. And even though I wasn't a massive comic book fan at the time, and I'm still not, I'm more of a casual fan. I remember thinking like, this is probably going to be good. But when it came out, I never saw it because the word of mouth about it was so negative that I just, for whatever reason, I never got around to seeing it. This has a 62% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, which is, not great, but not terrible. But the audience approval rating is only 29%. And this is one of those rare examples where the audiences really like the film far less than the critics. And I remember the box office drop off from the opening weekend to the second. It was so significant. I just remember this being a thing even 20 plus years later. And yeah, like I said, gentlemen, I had never seen this before until the other week when I watched it for this episode.
I don't know how you made it that long. Honestly, very impressive.
I had seen bits and pieces of it.
I feel like this was something that was on TNT like every Sunday at 3 p.m. from just 2005 to like 2012, and I would always just watch it then.
TNT
Yeah, that's
gems.
probably where I saw a chunk of it. I remember seeing the desert action chase a couple different times on TV, but never the whole thing until now.
That desert action chase. It's almost like we just went to war with some country in the desert, and that was really projecting something from cinema into real life. I wonder what it was.
That you just made a very important observation, Garrett, because I was asking Anton before you hopped on. I was like, can you please explain the Middle Eastern wailing chanting that's heavily featured throughout the score and in many scenes? And I think that's it. That's the reason.
Every movie with a Middle East scene from basically just 1991 onwards always has the hiya, like harmonizing. I'm like, oh, it's very mystical here. Like, oh yes, Arabia. Wow, it's
which was which of course what we were thinking of with a Hulk, mystical.
Right. We weren't actually in the Middle East in this one, but it was like, was that Arizona or Utah or somewhere?
Arizona. I feel like Arizona is fair because he basically has to hop, skip, and jump literally back to San Francisco. So I feel like Arizona is a fair assessment.
I would have, or maybe was it Nevada? All the nuclear testing in Nevada.
Oh yeah, that's it. That's got to be it.
Yeah, that makes more sense. Way more sense. You're right.
Yeah, good observation, Anton.
Smart guy.
So I think the circumstances were probably against this film when it came out. I was looking at some of the box office competition that it would have had in the spring, summer of 2003. It was a lot. I think we touched on this with League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, but you had The Matrix Reloaded around that time, the first Pirates of the Caribbean, Terminator 3, Finding Nemo, Kill Bill. Later that year, you had Last Samurai, Master and Commander, and The Lord of the Rings, Return of the King. You can just see how this got outshone. I think it's, it's not that surprising that it wasn't a big hit at the time.
It's also the second week drop off on this film, just the negative word of mouth really tainted as well. And I think coming off the heels of X2 in May, everyone was very excited. We're like, all right, summer of superheroes, here we go. And to basically go from the highs of X2 to the mids, let's just call it.
All right. You want to get into the production history, Anton?
Let's do it. So jumping into the production history, producers Avi Arad and Gale Ann Hurd sought to develop a Hulk film as early as 1990 when they brought their idea to Universal Pictures. And Gale Ann Hurd is best known for having been married to James Cameron and Brian De Palma at one point. She co-produced the Terminator series as well as very many well-known blockbusters, Aliens, The Abyss, Tremors, Armageddon, The Punisher, and long-running TV series The Walking Dead. We did.
Oh yeah, we just talked about her on The Abyss.
Shout out in The Abyss, which was also a different movie.
Yes, it sure was.
Avi Arad is a name that Marvel fans would recognize. So the Spider-Man series, X-Men, Blade, Daredevil and the Punisher, and Iron Man are all some of the films that he has produced. So screenwriter Michael France was hired for the film. He would later go on to write the screenplay for highly successful films like Cliffhanger and Goldeneye. And France ended up disagreeing with Universal's idea to have the Hulk fight terrorists. John Turman, a Hulk comic book fan, was brought to write the script in 1994, getting Stan Lee's approval. Turman wrote at least 10 drafts, some of which involving General Ross and the military pursuing the Hulk, as well as the leader as a villain. So, like with a lot of the films we're covering on the podcast, the studio heads could not agree on where to take the story. And Hurd brought her husband, Jonathan Hinesley, as co-producer, and Michael France was brought back to rework the screenplay. Sorry, my puppy just got a hold of my microphones. Huey, down.
Nice, Huey.
Huey, no, stop. This is an act of aggression. Stop.
I can take over if you want.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay, jump on.
In April 1997, Joe Johnston was hired as director. He's done some pretty high-profile films like The Rocketeer, Jumanji, Jurassic Park 3. We talked about him prominently when we covered Captain America: The First Avenger, because that's the MCU film that he ended up directing. But Universal's plan for this film was to begin filming in late 1997 with an intended 1999 release date. When Hensley made it clear that he wanted to work on the screenplay, Universal fired Michael France, buying out his contract. Now Joe Johnston left the project as well. So Hensley lobbied the studio to make the film his first directing job. In what is becoming a rather confusing series of events, Universal brought Turman back a second time to write 2 more drafts. And then Zach Penn then rewrote that one. Hensley rewrote it too, working with a number of other writers, one of whom included a young J.J. Abrams. The film's development got far enough along that Industrial Light and Magic had been hired to provide the visual effects, and concept art was being produced. But further script disagreements pushed the start of filming back, and by April 1998, Universal officially put the project on hiatus due to the budget exceeding $100 million. And a quick sidebar. So at this point in the timeline, this was a couple of years before the success of X-Men and Spider-Man. Big budget superhero movies didn't really exist outside of the Batmans, and the latest of which, Batman and Robin, had been a massive flop the previous year. Blade was released in 1998 and it became a surprise hit, but it was R-rated and it wasn't seen as a traditional blockbuster. So Universal saw this project as a considerable risk, which of course it was. Now, despite the project being shelved and Michael France being fired, he remained dedicated to the idea of writing the Hulk script, and he managed to convince Universal to let him to return and work on it. The studio liked his third attempt enough, but they had their own ideas as well, of course. France claimed, quote, "Someone within the Universal hierarchy wasn't sure if this was a science fiction adventure or a comedy, and I kept getting directions to write both." End quote. In early 2000, Universal brought on Michael Tolkin and then David Hayter to work on France's screenplay. Hayter's draft featured the leader, Zax. Am I pronouncing that right?
Zizax.
Oh, Zizax? Oh, okay.
Zizax.
Yeah.
There's 3 Z's. It's hard. I know.
Isn't that a Dr. Seuss character? Oh, that's the Lorax. Never mind. Oh, whoops. Okay. And also the Absorbing Man as the main villain. So it would have been the leader, Zizax, and the Absorbing Man. The following year, 2001, this is where Ang Lee becomes involved in the project along with his producing partner, James Schamus. Ang Lee famously turned down the offer to direct Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines so that he could make this. And Lee cited influences from King Kong, Frankenstein, Jekyll and Hyde, Beauty and the Beast, Faust, and the Greek mythology to interpret the story. That's quite a lot.
We'll say it a lot in this episode. Ambitious.
That is an understatement of the century, too. Also, David Hayter, coming straight off X2, he's like, it worked when I crammed 50 villains into there. Why can't we do it with this movie? And everyone gets their powers, if I'm not mistaken, in the same gamma X in his script. And that would have been just...
Ooh, good
boy.
one.
Kind of a fun little tie-in to, I know that we mentioned in the production history that 1999 was originally, I think, the soft date for like a release for the film. 1999, there was an Incredible Hulk release, but it was actually the Incredible Hulk coaster at Universal Studios in Orlando.
Great
that
roller coaster.
Roller coaster is awesome. Getting shot out of that tube at 60 miles an hour, honestly.
Yeah.
It's an experience.
Top tier coaster.
Yeah, definitely. I noticed all the things that Ang Lee cited influence is from. None of them include the comic book that this is based on. Yeah, just an observation.
Makes too much sense. Also, everyone hated comic books, I'm convinced, until Kevin Feige was like, all right, can I just cook for a bit? I feel like up until then, they're like, nah, screw it. Bruce Banner fights terrorists, bugs. I don't care. But God forbid he fights any of his rogues gallery.
Look, Garrett, it was a very different time. It wasn't cool for me to let people know I like comic books or anime yet.
Nerd.
Okay, so James Schamus, who is Ang Lee's producing and writing partner, he did his own rewrite of the script, and he merged Banner's father with Absorbing Man. There were major disputes over who would get credit for writing the screenplay that was used for the project. France, Turman, and Schamus ended up receiving final credit. But as we just heard, there was a lot of cooks in this kitchen. Now, in December 2001, Universal officially gave Hulk a June 2003 release date. For the role of Bruce Banner, many actors were considered. David Duchovny, Jeff Goldblum, both of them auditioned. Billy Crudup and Tom Cruise turned down the role. Edward Norton did as well, disliking the script. Norton would, of course, end up playing the character 5 years later in the pseudo-sequel. You know, I'm thinking about this movie with Jeff Goldblum. He's a more believable scientist than Eric Bana. I'll say that.
So you're saying I could be a Hulk of some sort?
Honestly, I'm just picturing Dr. Ian Malcolm from Jurassic Park as the Hulk now. And now I just have this mental image in my head of Jeff Goldblum laying on a table, shirt half buttoned, but as the Hulk. And I hate you for putting that mental image in my brain. And I know that's a me problem, but still, I'm blaming you.
Hulk finds a way?
Hulk finds a way. Yeah, exactly.
Well, fortunately for you, Garrett, Ang Lee decided that Eric Bana was the right man for the role. Probably because his name is similar to Banner. That's
He's
my
like,
theory on
nah,
that.
we're calling him Krenzler. Screw it, no Banner.
Yeah, that was, yeah.
Or do you
Well,
think it was his Australian accent? He's like, oh, Eric Bana. And he's like, oh, yeah, Banner. You already have it. Great. Let's just temp that accent down a little bit. And we got it.
You said his name's Banner? Let's hire him.
Perfect. Amazing. Great. Easy.
Well, he cast him after seeing his performance in Chopper. He was cast in October 2001. He signed on for additional 2 sequels.
Oops.
They thought they were going to make a sequel to this.
Oof.
Oh, man. He said that he was not a comic fan, but he had been obsessed with the Hulk TV show as a kid. Jennifer Connelly took the role of Betty Ross because she wanted to work with Ang Lee. Filming began in March 2002 with locations including Arizona, Utah, the San Francisco Bay Area, and Sequoia National Park, where the battle between Bruce and his father was supposed to take place. Industrial Light and Magic used previous technology from Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, used for the Dobby character, to create the Hulk with computer-generated imagery. ILM completed their work less than a month before the film was released. Here's the good one. Michael Dana was originally hired to score the film. His work could be described as non-traditional, involving African drumming, Arabic singing, and Japanese elements. Universal balked at this and replaced him with Danny Elfman late in the process, leaving Elfman only 37 days to score the entire 2+ hour film. Ang Lee asked Elfman to leave in some of Dana's work, which he did. Apparently, he left it all in because there is quite a lot of non-traditional elements prevalent in this score.
Quite a bit, yeah.
Yeah. And when the film finally opened, we mentioned the strong opening, but it quickly fell off the following weekend. It ultimately did not make its money back, and Universal must have lost a considerable amount on this one, as we don't know how much they spent on marketing.
The one thing I will say, though, we're never going to get a movie similar to just the absolute swing that this was too. Yes, we have, some quote character-driven superhero films, if you want to call something like Joker that, but this was a straight up mainstream summer blockbuster with a big green guy who is just pure id and destroys things. And we're like, nah, we'll make it like an Oedipal complex, like father drama that's 2 hours and 20 minutes long. Oh, and Hulk doesn't show up until a third of the way through it. You'll love it.
Well, that's where I want to start when we talk about why wasn't it better now.
Ooh, what a transition.
Let's start with Ang Lee. Was he the right director for this?
Okay. Now that's a interesting question to ask first because I know your answer, Pat, but I think there's a lot of we touched on it earlier around this was still a time period where superhero films were getting figured out, right? There's no like kind of clear template for how to make a great superhero film. So if we're thinking of how do we fit, I'm thinking if we're thinking of is he the right director for like a traditional superhero film? I'd say no.
He knows how to stage action. And I remember reading that Universal was circling Ang Lee while Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon was still out and before it even crossed that $100 million number. And they were like, we want this guy. He knows how to stage action. So I'm wondering if it was a little bit of the studio was like, we can kind of control him a little bit, but we know he's going to put those artistic flourishes on it. But
yeah,
I think his movie's at odds with itself. Like I made the joke that, the whole thing with Bruce Banner and the Hulk, it's the whole dichotomy of the two people coexist in the same space. It's a drama that's under the guise of being a superhero movie, if we can say that, but it's really not a superhero or a comic book movie. And it's more kind of that, father-son drama at its core, or father and child drama, you could say, with other characters too, in general.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you. But when we think of like, was it a good decision to choose Ang Lee? Remember, it was right on the tails of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which was huge, right? And so when you have a big film like that, which features a lot of martial arts, it's a big action, or in the I think kind of in the same vein of like if you have a film like the Hulk, you think, oh, it's going to be a big action film. The man knows how to stage action. You're missing kind of the core components of what is a good Ang Lee movie, and Ang Lee also knows how to, or Ang Lee loves to focus on character development and like relationships between characters, which you got a ton of in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Well, that's also like the thing. Ang Lee, he was basically shooting like the Greek tragedy, like you were saying before, with Eric Bana and all of the other actors on set. And then at ILM, he's basically making a giant monster movie where he's running around mocap as the Hulk too. It's kind of two things being made at once. And it's just almost oil and water in that sense.
Pat, what are your thoughts?
Everyone was certainly excited for him at the time, but his approach to the material, there's just way too many question marks in my opinion. I mean, the one thing I would say is, Anton, I know you feel this way, but let me articulate on this. This is absolutely the closest thing that we'll ever get to an art house superhero movie.
Mm-hmm.
Garret, I think you made the point earlier in the intro. We're never going to get another movie like this in the superhero genre, at least not anytime soon. The superhero movies that we get now are far more conservative, far safer choices. But I have to say, it doesn't sound like anybody had a fun time making this.
It just
Eric Bana, he later commented that the shoot was, quote, ridiculously serious, a silent set, morbid in a lot of ways, end quote. And Lee told him that he was shooting a Greek tragedy, that he would be making a, quote, whole other movie about the Hulk at Industrial Light and Magic, like you mentioned, Garret.
Ooh, wow. I'm like a prophet. I'm like guessing what you're saying. Look at me go.
An example of Lee's art house approach to the film was he took Bana to watch a bare knuckle boxing match. And Bana would later reflect on his experience in a negative way. He said the majority of the time he was working indoors while the rest of the cast interacted with a CGI recreation of the Hulk, which limited his own screen time. One of the many challenges that Bana faced was Lee's split screen technique to mimic the comic book panels. This technique required many more takes of individual scenes than usual. I think the comic panel stuff, it's a great idea for comic books. Its execution on film, it's not handled well, in my opinion. They don't need a split screen of someone walking down a hallway or turning to look at someone else. I think Lee took the comic book thing too literally. It comes across as very gimmicky.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think part of it is tone. It's a very dark subject matter, but even just the lighting in the film, the use of like the comic book cuts and swipes, it just ends up kind of feeling very imbalanced in terms of, is this supposed to be like a campy comic book or is this supposed to be like a dramatic art house piece? And I feel like with that inconsistency in tone, you don't even get those same comic book panel themes or just imagery like throughout the whole film. It's very inconsistent.
That's almost I was going to say the problem with that is that it's not executed often enough too. So it feels very jarring or haphazard when it does happen. Like there's just good stretches of the movie where it's just a normal drama. And then it's those whip bang like edits and cuts too. And it's just a big kind of, I guess you could say, a shift in almost like tone of how the movie's being told. And it just comes across like very jarring. Whether you like it or not, it's just, again, kind of at odds with the movie that's being presented.
I think it's so silly. It feels like when a 15-year-old discovers PowerPoint and they're doing every transition possible in their presentation.
What's more awkward, this or during Adam West Batman when he throws a punch, it goes pow, and then you see like a image of pow on the screen.
Yeah, that's definitely not good use of onomatopoeia too. And I personally, what I think Lee was going for was kind of almost onomatopoeia without having the pow of Adam West's Batman on screen, with the kind of storytelling devices of the comic book panels too. And I mean, if we can go to Garrett's Comic Corner for a bit, I mean, Anton, I'm sure you would kind of agree with this too, but especially when you're reading comic books, your eyes kind of flutter to different parts of the panel, maybe forward or behind, and you kind of almost, your mind's eye fills in parts of maybe what other characters outside of the panel are thinking or what they're saying or doing in between the panels too. And I understand that Lee is basically trying to almost bring all of those characters into frame, albeit in different panels, so you can kind of see everyone's almost like reactions to what another character is saying, or just to convey another tone. But again, it's just so much for the eye to take in and something moving, aka a movie, versus a comic book where you could spend, 1 second or 1 minute or 1 hour on a page kind of analyzing all of those different panels too. So it's, again, too quick for your mind's eye to almost conceptualize the same way as you would watch a comic book. But hey, honestly, credit to him for experimenting with it. So I guess maybe I'm a supporter.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I don't think it's while I don't think that it landed as well as maybe we would have loved, it is part of the experimentation and fun that I think one can appreciate when trying to adapt comic book movies at a time that there was no such thing as like a traditional comic book movie.
Right. There was no template too. So again, it's honestly more shocking to me that nobody's really tried to riff on that device in any other movie too. Yes, of course, movies use split screen all the time, but kind of an editing style like this to almost match that comic book feel. I'm just kind of shocked we haven't even seen it, even almost like the animated medium too.
Because they're too scared. They're like, they saw this film, they're like, oh man, we can't touch this.
Yeah, they're like, you know what, not even with a 10-foot pole.
I think it's bad because he was relying on this editing technique as a gimmick to lean on the comic book thing when he should have just been leaning on the content. And the content, I think, is where he didn't get it right. Based on his quotes and the influences that he was using, he seemed obsessed with making anything but a superhero movie. The Greek tragedy this, art house that. It's definitely ambitious, and I do commend him for trying something different, but this film's tone, it just doesn't know what it wants to be. There's some super serious melodrama here, and then you have parts where, what's his name, Home Depot guy, when he basically kills himself accidentally,
right?
When he blows up, and it does the comic book, almost like the Batman series thing, where it like freeze frames and there's like an outline of his body as the explosion's going off. There's just no way to take that seriously in a film.
Exploding into frame, I think that's the most 2003 anything ever. Regardless if it's good or bad, spoiler alert, I don't think it's that great at all. It is the most 2003 thing ever of just like over the top, hammy, like CGI effect too.
It was jarring, but you know what I mean though, right? It's like, am I supposed to take this movie seriously or not? Because there's certain scenes where you are, and then there's stuff like that where you're like, this is like parody.
Exactly.
Like, you know,
commit to the bit or don't.
I mean, I get you, Pat. But like, even just the thinking about like it's supposed to be a superhero film. Ang Lee's more obsessed with making a Greek tragedy or making an art house film. Why does it have to
go make an art house film?
But what I'm saying is, why does it have to be one or the other? Why can't Ang Lee have a vision of making an art house film that is a superhero film?
I think it is possible to do both, but you're putting a lot of burden on yourself by attempting to do both.
Which sounds like Ang Lee to me.
It does. It's a swing and a miss.
Look, it's a
gigantic miss.
Part of the perspective on this is even just kind of touches on the same like themes we've talked about around animated films. For the longest time, people have always interpreted animated films as like not serious, just for kids. It's like, oh, it's just an animated film.
Yeah.
So if you think about it that same terms for like superhero films, it's like, oh, it should fit a certain mold. It should be fun. It should be light. Or the idea of art house doesn't entirely come to mind. But even when you think of comic books, for the longest time, comics have always had to kind of continue to evolve, continue to try to fit a certain mold. And it's only when like different writers or artists try to really push the envelope, you kind of get art or really things that transcend comics. And I'm thinking like Watchmen, V for Vendetta, The Dark Knight Strikes again, or The Dark Knight Returns. So in the same way, like I do respect Ang Lee for wanting to transcend a superhero film, especially at a time when there was no like mold yet for what a superhero film is.
I think the closest thing we had was the first Spider-Man at that point, right? But to your point, it was so new it hadn't been established.
Yeah, I guess X-Men you could call kind of like the proto like superhero film in terms of having, more than one character that has powers, if you want to say, or at least like a protagonist of sorts.
Oh, actually, I'm glad we mentioned Spider-Man. That's a good example of where I think they got the tone right, where there's very serious moments in it and very campy moments in it. Sam Raimi did a very good job of balancing the two.
And it also goes to say, too, like, you guys were talking about the production notes, too. Like, this went through how many writers, how many directors, developmental
Too many.
Health. Exactly.
Too many.
But clearly Universal had heard pitch upon pitch and was like, nah, I don't really think that's great. And then once Ang Lee comes aboard, they're like, yes, they're on his vision too. So it's almost, I don't want to say unfair to kind of criticize like Ang Lee, but the studio had all these chances and all these different scripts that it's like, this is what they went with. So it's kind of, they should have known more of what that movie they were making too. So again, I think the reach exceeds the grasp for Ang Lee. And again, the ideas are there too, but the execution might not be. But again, if Universal wanted to make a different movie, it's not like they didn't have a million chances before that.
It's true.
This is true. You know what I will blame on Ang Lee? This horrible score.
Greenlighting that? Yeah, that's
sleepwalking
through
this story. I can't believe it.
I don't know if this is all Danny Elfman's fault or Michael Dana's fault for them keeping his stuff in there, but Wow. This film, the score is definitely unconventional. It contains the early 2000s trope that we already talked about briefly of incorporating vaguely Middle Eastern style wailing into the soundtrack, which I first recall hearing on Gladiator, where it was used to great effect. But here, it's less effective. Like when the scene where Bruce is being transported to the underground desert base in a helicopter, like the score might as well be from Black Hawk Down. It's completely inappropriate. Or even better, you know what it reminded me of? The parody score from Team America when they're in Iraq.
Oh my God, that's such a great call. That is so funny. Oh my God, that is hilarious. I think that music, they were like hammer the wailing from the script that was where Banner fights terrorists. For a fact there was a note in that script that was like score loud, wailing louder.
And I confirmed it with Anton before the recording. There is no Middle Eastern story.
Nope.
Origins in here at all to tie this to it.
Well, there's not really any comic book anything in this film, but yeah, we can get into that another time.
No.
Particularly for the score. Yeah, not really Middle Eastern roots for the Hulk.
Zero.
Not like the Mandarin in an upcoming recording we're going to be doing.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, teeing that up. I have to say, as far as Ang Lee goes, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon is one of my favorite movies. This is one of the worst follow-ups to a masterpiece I can ever think of from a director. This is just
ultimate
shocking drop-off.
This is an ultimate blank check movie, though, in the sense that they're like, here, whatever budget you want, make the movie you want. Crouching Tiger was such a success. Like I mentioned before, they signed him on before he even was, really through that kind of run to stardom on Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. They're like, sure, take this movie that's been developmental hell, was considered too expensive, make the movie that you want to make too. So again, kind of one of the last like real big blank check type Hollywood films too.
Anything to add on Ang Lee before we move on to the next reason?
Just wanted to mention, if you look at the films that he directed before this, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and Hulk are definitely exceptions in terms of what around use of action in the film. So many of his films are just really more character pieces or adaptations of like classic novels. So, for example, Sense and Sensibility.
Shout out to my girl Emma Thompson.
Directed classics like The Wedding Banquet, Eat, Drink, Man, Woman. So there's definitely a type of film that is Ang Lee, and I think that this film was very unabashedly Ang Lee.
Next reason why it wasn't better: it's boring. One of the biggest criticisms of this film is that it did not have nearly enough action in it. I completely agree with this. This is a long movie with a lot of dialogue.
I can't argue with
non-compelling dialogue.
It was a real bait and switch, because I remember seeing that god-awful trailer when I was 12, like during the Super Bowl, and I was like, action, Hulk is flinging tanks everywhere, and like we mentioned before, he doesn't show up until 45 minutes into the movie. And even then, when's that real first set piece?
Yeah, this really does commit the cardinal sin of being boring. Like, if you're going to do a superhero movie, at least make it exciting. This is a snooze fest. I almost nodded off multiple times trying to watch this. 138 minutes, that's pushing the limit. This is, I'd say, 15, 20 minutes too long. The pace is ponderous.
Yeah, the pacing was really hard. I think I thought about it more like, how could the pacing have been better, or what would have been a better focus? I mean, right, we don't get the Hulk until, Garrett, you mentioned it, 45 minutes in. Would it have been better if we get the Hulk like, 5 minutes in, 10 minutes in, maybe, from like an excitement factor? But I think like what we did get was Ang Lee trying to set the tone of the universe in terms of really shoving down our throats that Banner has had a very, very messed up upbringing. And I feel like that, trying to emphasize that along with the surrounding universe of being a researcher, his relationship with Betty, what's Thunderbolt Ross up to, it takes a long time to develop that.
You know how in an action movie there's usually that one quiet drama scene?
Yeah,
I was kind of waiting for that. I know that was a rhetorical question, but like this movie, it's like a good drama movie with
there's like 15 of those scenes.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost the opposite of that rhetorical question that I posed to. And yeah, Pat, to your point, 138 minutes, and you start to feel those minutes. And we'll get to it, I'm sure, at the end too. But we're not even at the absorbing man until over 2 hours into the movie. So we're just barreling into the credits basically at that point with effects and action.
you get a lot of character scenes with very uncharismatic characters.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think about a film like, I mean, I'm going to compare this to the gold standard, The Dark Knight. The Dark Knight had a lot of dramatic scenes in it, but all of the characters had charisma. Like you think about even like Morgan Freeman would pop in. You're like, cool, I can watch Morgan Freeman talk for 5 minutes. There's nothing like that in here.
It's a lot about, do you remember the trauma? That was traumatic. I don't really remember what happened on the base too. So
Was it a dream?
A lot of that. Is it a dream?
Memory.
Is it a dream?
What's that door?
This would have the same problem that Superman Returns did when it came out a couple years after this, where it's just like we were all wondering, like, why is there like family stuff in here? What's going on? Can we see Superman do something? And they're like, no. He's a dad now.
Wait, you don't like seeing Bruce Banner's father stab his mother and watching just traumatic child abuse for the first 20 minutes of your Hulk movie? What are you talking about?
Garrett, I'm not going to I won't bury the lead here. I had no knowledge that there was flashbacks to the 60s when I first started watching this. the prologue set in the 60s, it was so poorly acted. I thought I was watching like a parody of a superhero film. I had to pause the film on Peacock to I was like, is this the right movie? Like, what is this?
Are we not convinced that was on purpose campiness to capture a comic book vibe?
I want to say it is. I really want to say it is, especially with like
it's bad either way. I mean, it's whether it was intentional or not, it's awful. Yeah, I was like pretty close to texting you anytime. Like, I don't think we can cover this. Like,
also, did you notice that Edith Banner, Bruce Banner's mom, looks eerily similar to like Jennifer Connelly, like aka Betty Ross?
Yeah.
Like, I don't
That was
know.
on purpose.
I made an Oedipus joke already, but I don't know. My Oedipal complex is off the charts right now.
The problem with the first act is we get this painstaking prologue that takes up way too much screen time. And then they start to develop the relationship between Bruce and Betty with just awful expository dialogue. And they try to wrap it up in 2 seconds where Bruce is like, nobody expects this to be easy after we were so close. That dialogue's completely for the audience. That's not anything they would say to each other. And then it just smash cuts to them in the lab. They give us 20 minutes of this horribly acted flashback. And then the central relationship of the film, or one of the two, right? Bruce and Betty, they try to introduce that to us in 45 seconds.
It's really funny too, because in the credits, they have the flashback with the editing style that we've already talked about of Bruce's father basically just cutting up starfish here, regeneration there. And you're like, okay, we're getting the exposition out of the way. Like, we're going to go right into Bruce Banner's life.
Right.
Nope. 20-minute prologue. Team Bruce Banner for 5 seconds. Bruce and Betty for 8 seconds, basically. And Josh Lucas and his frosted tips are now in the movie. Oh, and he dated Betty, by the way, too.
The good old college days. So, how's business?
He's so mustache twirling, and not as good as Sam Elliott's mustache, which neither here nor there.
Look, I was at Home Depot the other day, and I thought of him.
Of Josh Lucas?
God.
Yeah, he's the voice of Home Depot. Has been for years.
Good for him. You know what?
Yeah.
Good for you. Make that money.
I'm sure he's getting a nice paycheck from that.
It's funny because even his character, Thunderbolt Ross, of course, Bruce Banner and Betty Ross, all characters from the comics. But Garrett, you'll be here with you'll agree with me. No Rick Jones in the film.
Superfan Rick Jones was in some earlier drafts too, and it's just the Hulk. Yes, he doesn't have the rogues gallery maybe of like a Spider-Man or someone like that too, but he's got some great villains to go up against. And they're like, you know what? Dad, family drama, abuse, dead mom, and shit. Why not? The Absorbing Man, who's like a Thor adversary pretty often, and a minor one at that, and not a smart guy too. It's just names in comic books and not characters from comic books, if that makes sense. And that was Garrett's Comic Corner. Thank you for joining.
That's a good point.
Is there anything more boring than having your primary villain be the janitor?
But you make it Nick Nolte. Excuse me, I'm laughing too hard at that. You just get the best actor you can, just not caring one iota about the performance on screen, and you get that magnum opus. I think it's okay.
Was he the best actor they could get?
He was the craziest one they could get.
He was the
best available.
I was laughing so hard when Jennifer Connelly's character is like, "Where's the other janitor?" And Nolte's like, "He died."
He died. I'm the new guy.
I'm like, what? And she's just like, oh, okay.
He just came off his DUI, so I think that might have been poor taste.
Oh, this film is how we got that famous photo.
That's true. And you know what? Everyone was like, wow, he looks like crap. But I think he was actually just growing his hair out for this specific role, too.
That was not costuming.
That was not costuming.
That's how he showed up on set.
Of the police station. Yeah, exactly. And he's like, can you pay
I decided to save the production some money by providing my own costumes.
And then he's like, my bail's $1 million. So you could just pay that fee directly to the court. Thank you.
Bear gives me nightmares.
Also, I want to know what that interview process was like for him to become the janitor. Like, no one realized, like, you know, maybe that was a guy who used to work here. Like, Thunderbolt Ross did not recognize him at all. Like, no, I'm getting into
that. I'm glad you brought that up because I was curious about that. So he was in prison for 30 years. Did they explain why he was let out and why they weren't keeping tabs on him if they felt he was so dangerous?
They let you off for treason at some point, I guess.
Oh, they do? Okay, just making sure.
Well, you know how, like, in comics, like, everything moves at a blistering pace. It's like, you know, I don't know, name a villain. They want to destroy Manhattan, and then they get out of the raft for, like, good behavior, like, 2 issues later or something like that. So I think we're doing the comic book hands-waving thing of, like, oh, the lizard's fine. He won't try to make everyone into lizard creatures anymore, and then Spider-Man has to throw him back in the raft. So I think we're going by that silly comic book logic of why can't we just keep villains in jail, basically?
The part that I was really looking forward to was actually seeing the accident that caused his transformation into the Hulk, right? When he actually gets exposed to the gamma radiation.
Ooh.
I thought it was completely underwhelming. It happens in a flash, in mere seconds, and then it just immediately cuts to him sitting in a hospital bed. Like, did they cut scenes out? I was expecting something more dramatic.
Very underwhelming, especially compared to the comic as well. I mean, very similarly, right? Like, he's trying to protect that fellow, like, research assistant in the scene. In the comics, right, he saves sidekick Rick Jones by, like, throwing him into a protective pit, so he absorbs all of the gamma radiation. But no, like, iconic part of that is just the radiation coming from, like, nuclear fallout. None of that. You get none of that.
But you do get plenty of shots of jellyfish.
Yeah.
And starfish. And frogs.
That's what I have to say. Regeneration is like our word of the day. Like, if you took a shot every time you heard the word regeneration or like cell growth or kind of some synonym to that too, you would have been just dead by the end of that prologue. Oh my God. Before those credits. Oh my God. We're cutting up starfish. We're blowing up frogs.
Yeah.
You name it.
A lot of blown up frogs.
I almost fell asleep when he's in the dream state and he's wandering around the, like, motel, whatever, desert motel area with Betty. I almost fell asleep.
It's all, but you know what? Back to the Ang Lee in the credits with the editing, though, I will say when they present, like, the flashbacks, especially, like, Bruce, for example, picks up the photo and then you're transported into that photo of that time with Bruce and Betty. I'm like, that is some cool editing over there, too. But to your point, like, in that other scene, it just does not work. And honestly, it's disorienting. I'm like, wait, are we in the past? Are we in the present? Are we in a dream? I have no idea where I am, too. There's just the sense of place is just really not there. And also, it's boring, so that doesn't help either.
When we finally get action, I think it's hit and miss. I think the desert chase, I'll get to that in a second. But the first, I'm not counting where he transforms in the lab and just smashes it up. I wouldn't call that an action scene.
No.
The first real action scene is about an hour into the film. It's the dog attack. They're animated like a Warner Brothers cartoon. It seemed like a parody. I'm not sure if it was supposed to come across as scary, but maybe it's just the CGI not aging well. But I was just shocked at how laughable it was.
Oh, it did not age well. And I have a question for you guys. Did you know that the dogs have names? And if so, do you want to guess what the 3 dogs' names were?
I'm down to guess.
Sure. We can start with the poodle first. The antsy leader, the poodle.
Something ironic like Crusher.
All right, Pat.
Puddles.
Lily the poodle.
Oh, nice.
Wow.
That's so wholesome.
And then we have our pit bulls and our mastiff. Oh my gosh. We got Sammy and Smokey. Oh my gosh.
They actually had action figures released for the dogs.
No,
they didn't.
Mutated dogs or just regular dogs?
For the mutated dogs, you can look it up. Yeah.
They look like cartoon characters, right?
Yeah, I mean, they look like action figures that, of course, we have to think about a Marvel film. I'm sure the studio was thinking of what kind of merchandise we can do, and
Avi Arad. Yeah, I mean, Avi Arad and Ike Perlmutter more or less kind of saved Marvel by making all the toys from them and just being like, hey, sure, you know what? You want to make a Blade movie? Here's the rights. You want to make a Daredevil movie? Here's the rights. You want to put Absorbing Man in your movie? Sure, here's the rights too. So these guys love toys, that's for sure.
You want to replace Maya Hansen with shitty Guy Pearce? Let's do it.
Gosh,
we'll get to that.
Well, yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there.
Not a Guy Pearce fan. I'll just let you know now. Not a Guy Pearce fan.
I did just rewatch LA Confidential, though. Great film. Quick aside.
I am so glad you brought that up. I rewatched that. That's on Netflix, right?
Yes.
I rewatched that recently too. What a phenomenal movie.
Yeah, been a minute, but classic.
Man, that's a good movie. Anton, watch it again. It holds up so well.
Thanks,
it's
Kevin
so
Spacey,
good.
for ruining everything, but otherwise,
I know. Oh, man, you know what? That's a masterpiece. I don't know if there's a flaw in that film.
It is. That is pure popcorn cinema, just like Hulk 2003. Just kidding.
Yeah.
I texted this to Anton previously. When Bruce wakes up in the hospital room and Nick Nolte is sitting in there with the 3 dogs, I burst out laughing.
It is the funniest thing of all time.
If you had sent me that scene and told me this is like a Saturday Night Live clip about the new Hulk movie, like I would have believed you. There's just no way to take that seriously.
Or when Bruce sees the dogs like running around, he's like, I wonder what these guys are doing here. Do. Like,
man, where he's like the creepy neighbor. It's like you when you see Nick Nolte like at his house, you're like it's kind of like Disturbia.
Oh, it's very Disturbia, very much so. He's like, I'm watching you with my poodle and my mastiff and my pit bull.
But the rest of the action scenes, they're darkly lit, probably to disguise the CGI limitations.
Right.
The final fight scene, we're glossing over some of this, but where he fights his dad, it's in the dark, it's underwater, very hard to tell what was going on. When they're spraying him with the foam, it looks like graphics from Mortal Kombat.
I think that's very true.
It's just it's not good.
It is not good.
So I have thoughts on like each of kind of like the action sequences too. So I don't know if you guys want to like pick one and we can like debate the merits of each, or if you want me to just give like thoughts on all. I'm not sure if you guys have anything you want to dig into specific, but I have thoughts.
I'll give you my general problem with all the action first, and then we can drill down if you want.
Okay.
There's no tension in anything.
Mm-hmm.
They went to outrageous lengths to avoid casualties, except for Talbot, right? But he basically dies by his own hand.
Yes.
Like, no one dies when the Hulk throws that giant metal disc through the control room. Like, nobody dies. No one in the tanks died. The helicopter crew survived. When you're in this situation where your main character can't die and is supposedly causing all this mayhem, but he's not actually killing anyone, there's just no tension in anything.
Yeah, there's no stakes, there's no tension, and probably, like, if I had to guess, on purpose from Ang Lee, just to make sure that it's a sympathetic character.
I agree with that.
And had to be PG-13. Couldn't be R.
They really go out of the way to make the Hulk a hero. I mean, the most obvious scene, too, is when that fighter jet's out of control barreling towards the Golden Gate Bridge, and he just jumps on it to save the pilot and all the civilians there. It's like, see, look, he is a hero. But that really is kind of antithetical to like who the Hulk is. It's pure mayhem and destruction. And yeah, he is a hero down at the core, but he causes a lot of destruction, which I know you're talking about the Incredible Hulk, at least makes a point to show with some of its fight scenes too.
If you want to talk about the individual fights, we can. All I have to say is at one point, Bruce Banner is fighting a cloud.
Okay, the worst part is I actually kind of do like that elemental fight. I think it is actually a really good storytelling device when he and his father are fighting through the clouds, because it becomes a fight less of the physical beings and more of the fight of the trauma itself too. So personally, I'm a big fan of the idea that it is trying to convey, but not so much the actual execution and what you see on screen, because to your point, it looks like a big, sloppy, gloppy mess.
Anton, any thoughts on the fights here?
Sorry, we can cut this part out, but I'm trying to stop Huey from chewing on his chew toy, which is constantly squeaking, so my bad.
That's what that was.
Yeah,
we
sorry
love
about
you,
that.
Huey. It's okay.
No, that's all right. We love Huey on this podcast. You know that. Friend of the show, Huey.
Friend of the show.
Friend of the show.
So I kept thinking, like, Ang Lee knows how to stage action. and for whatever reason, this film's villain is even worse once he's given powers, right? And then it just becomes like an emotional like cloud sequence to end like their fight or lack thereof. And I think it just really hinges on the fact that like Ang Lee really wanted to emphasize this is less of like a film about like the Hulk rampaging, but more about like the catharsis of like confronting his father about like his childhood trauma, which okay, like that's the film that we got, but also usually not how Hulk fights go.
Yeah.
That's a really good point too. Again, the allegories that are really presented, especially in that final fight too, of him almost like kind of confronting the drama, being surrounded by all of the elements that his father is basically taking in and becoming too. It's really presented well, in my opinion, like in terms of like the themes of the movie, like generational trauma, the father-son bond too, and just basically at the end of the day, his father views his son as an ends to a means too. Like we talked about the dogs too, but the dogs are effectively like a Bruce 2.0. We see in the prologue his father experimenting on Bruce to become something more. Obviously, the gamma explosion in this kind of really just awakens what's been inside him. And the Hulk dogs too are again a means to an end. And in that end fight where he basically just wants to absorb Bruce's power to go to the next level, and Bruce says, take all of it. It's not that he's just giving him that power, but he's kind of like unleashing the trauma and saying like, here you go, here's everything you've given to me. Can you actually handle what you have wrought? And of course he becomes, a giant gross CGI 2003 jellyfish. But like, to me, that is so tragic and so beautiful. And I realize I am saying this about Hulk 2003. I fully recognize that too.
Yeah.
So that's why a fight like that works for me. But in terms of like the visual medium, this is where it's like, this works on a comic book page versus like not in 2003 superhero films, unfortunately.
Yeah, embrace it, brother. I'm right there with you. In terms of it's very real stuff, right? It's very real themes, and most comic book films that we think or superhero films we think of nowadays don't really touch on that. Now, I was trying to think of like a superhero film that I've seen where you do get a blend of like very deep nuance, but then at the same time, like you do get really great action. And I was reminded of Zack Snyder's Watchmen. So like there is a world where you get that balance of like the action plus the nuance. And then I think about like Marvel films, or I mean, even, Pat, you made a really good call out, like Christopher Nolan and Batman films. It's possible to be able to tell, like, be able to touch on very deep themes and then also just have fantastic fight choreography and action. But again, those are films that came after this one.
Guardians of the Galaxy is probably the closest to like kind of those deeper themes. Like you can use Guardians of the Galaxy 2, which is clear like father-son drama, but even 3, the same thing with like, Rocket's whole arc too. And
3 broke
some great action in that movie. I mean, we could talk about Marvel's latest track record, but if any movie kind of hits close to these like archetypes, I think it would at least be like those movies in that Marvel formula.
Yep.
One thing I just want to say, though, that I do appreciate with these fight scenes, minus, yes, fart cloud, jellyfish clouds aside, there are a lot of practical effects in this movie, which I really do appreciate. In the desert fight scene, when Hulk basically bends the barrel of the tank back and it cuts that shot of just that frightened soldier's eyes and the basically just the barrel staring him down the eyes, I think is such a funny moment, and it works to great effect with like a practical effect too. And this movie is not funny at all, so that comic relief was honestly very welcome.
Yeah, there was not a lot of comedy in here at all. I know there's been a lot of criticism leveled at like the design of the Hulk. I know that's probably one of the most controversial parts of this film. I didn't actually think the creature design bothered me too much. I thought a lot of the CGI looked 20 years old. Now, admittedly, I'm not very familiar with the Hulk or the Hulk's, lore at all in terms of like, well, how big should he be? Can he keep getting bigger? How fast is, I don't know anything about that stuff, but the design of the Hulk didn't bother me at all.
Yeah.
I had many problems with this film. That was not one of them.
He's so green.
Yeah, he's very intensely green, but like I think the one thing that will constantly befuddle people's minds are how the heck do his pants stay on? It's like it's
Yes.
still a constant question.
His pants do not look that great though. The character design looks great. The pants to me, like they
They're
look
just there.
they're there. They're there. And I was reading before that Ang Lee apparently wanted Hulk to be naked the entire movie, which hell yes. Come on, Universal, let Ang Lee cook.
And then Ang Lee really had to get into character, just painted himself green, running around naked in a mocap suit.
Oh, you know he's running 40 takes of just one scene of Bruce Banner hanging dong in the like sequoias.
Yeah. Can you shoot multiple angles for the panels?
Yeah, please. Please, can you get my good side? It's cold.
Eric Bana
slow motion.
really hated his time on set.
He was
I don't think he had a very good time. Yeah.
No. But I mean, to be fair, there we've talked about a lot of actors who have experienced not great times with some prolific directors.
Yeah, this probably isn't that high on the list.
Yeah.
No.
Oh, by the way, Garrett, I have the official count here because you touched on this earlier. 9 different writers worked on at least 15 different drafts of the screenplay. Where's the direction?
Okay, this works as like my joke before. I was like, this Ang Lee should make a Frankenstein movie. 9 scripts? Boom. Look at that. There you go. It's like a Frankenstein script all of in itself. Look at it. Such a meta joke. Nice job. I'm giving myself credit for that. Good job, Garrett. Thank you.
We'll give you credit.
But I appreciate
Next reason why this wasn't better. The problem with the Hulk. This is sort of related to the film being boring. This is a storytelling problem that exists with the Hulk as a character. Hulk is a difficult character to base a movie around. And I found this bit from Joss Whedon. During an interview he gave about the Avengers, Whedon talked about this exact problem, how the audience wants the complete opposite of what the character wants. Banner doesn't want to be the Hulk. So most of his story is him trying to figure out a way to not be the Hulk, but the audience wants to see the Hulk.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's a pretty on-the-nose observation by
Makes
Whedon.
sense.
Yeah.
It really is a good point, though, because, I mean, I guess that's also why it's so hard to make a Hulk movie, because the characters literally always at odds with the audience, too. And a big, again, kind of trope with Bruce Banner is he's like, I'm going to cure myself of the Hulk. And us, the viewers, are like, no, you're not.
No,
We've
you're
seen
not.
this before. Yeah, like that would kind of defeat the purpose of this entire film, too.
That was always my problem with it, which I touched on earlier, right? There's no tension.
Mm-hmm.
If he goes full Hulk, hundreds of innocent people are going to be killed, right? If he's in a highly populated area, which of course they mention in the film, right? Doesn't Ross call the president at one point?
He does call the president at one point after he breaks out of containment.
Who's like fly fishing or something.
Real George W.
The great American outdoors. If he goes into a populated area, he's going to kill a lot of people. But audiences don't really want to see that, so they avoid that in the films. The MCU, I think, would do a better job of at least addressing that. But he suffers from like the Superman problem. Like you have a superhero that really has no limit in their ability, right? He can't die. So how do you keep that interesting over an entire movie or even a franchise? You can do that in comics because comics are just an entirely different medium. They're long form. But movies, there has to be some level of believability, right? But here, it all goes into the tension thing for me. None of the action scenes, he's never in any real danger. So a bunch of soldiers shooting at him for 10, 15 minutes straight doesn't do a lot for me.
It's also a very interesting idea, too. It's clearly the military doesn't know how to deal with this threat, which is why we kind of see them upgrading their armor, if you want to say, throughout the movie, too. But I think every point you've said just hits the nail on the head. And like, even looking at the MCU, when the Hulk, does Hulk out, he's usually under mind control, a la, Avengers 1 and 2, basically. Or he's kind of a willing participant in a battle royale, a la Thor Ragnarok. So he's never the willing participant, if that makes sense. He's always under the influence of somebody when he has to, quote, Hulk out, and that kind of lets the audience know it's okay that he's doing all this, basically.
Yeah.
I just like the Hulk better as a supporting character. Anton, you don't. Well, I don't want to speak for you, Anton, but I know you want a good Hulk movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Hulk in the comics, it is much easier to tell the stories in the comics because the surrounding cast is so out of this world and just so wild that it almost makes more sense now. Special effects and you've built the MCU, things kind of become more believable. But what always grounded Bruce Banner in the comics and in this film, what grounded the Hulk was always Bruce Banner. And so if you can tell a strong story of the origin of Bruce Banner, not the Hulk, but like Bruce Banner's story, then you get a very grounded understanding of like the tragedy that is the Hulk. And Ang Lee, I think, really understood that because he wanted to, make a superhero movie, but also say like, hey, like this is a very tragically flawed and, tragic character. Very difficult to tell that story because it is very dark. And because of all those things that you mentioned around, he brings destruction with him everywhere he goes. But to me, that's compelling, especially when you think about the arc of the Hulk and his ability to overcome that, grow, change, try to reject being the monster. So how does he even embrace being a hero?
It is also a really interesting point too. Like this movie doesn't explore it as much as kind of the later MCU films too, but Hulk has his kind of own identity and really isn't just, that sole kind of like Freudian, like I guess you could say, of like Bruce Banner too. Like the characters are really at odds and kind of fighting for control and are kind of at the eternal odds too. So it clearly works well. Like, the allegories of like Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster, or like Jekyll and Hyde too. But again, I think those stories have obviously a little more clear resolutions, whereas Hulk kind of does have that nomadic personalities. It's like, who am I? Where am I in this world? And how can I exist as both kind of Banner and the Hulk? And is there even a way to do that? It worked, honestly. Anton, you're kind of talking me into like a solo Hulk movie too. But Pat, right now, I will say I agree with you. Like he just works as a supporting character too, because I just don't think audiences can accept that almost as a full blockbuster, because the closest thing would be, I guess you could say, like this movie.
Yeah, and it's difficult, and I get that. But I think, if anything, that's why I have to commend Ang Lee for just trying, because if we don't get this, it's harder for people to even visualize what could a art house or more nuanced superhero film look like.
Yeah, but instead we'll watch Daredevil, Elektra, and everything else Mark Steven Johnson and Jonathan Hensley basically shoved down our throats for the couple years after this. So
there we go.
Oh, Daredevil's on our list.
God, Ben Affleck in that suit. Oof. Do you think he shows up in the new Deadpool movie? Because they already confirmed Elektra did. That's not a spoiler for anyone listening.
I don't know.
You're like, I hope
I'm not a Deadpool guy.
Anton, you're like, I hope not. But if he does, let it be in that red leather suit.
Yes, please.
The amount of bombs that Ben Affleck has survived.
The amount of bombs that Ben Affleck survived, is that more than the amount of bombs that General Thunderbolt Ross tries to throw at David Banner and Bruce Banner, hoping that solves the problem, even though
it might not be.
Yeah, it wasn't helping.
No. At the end.
That's a good transition. Let's talk about the acting.
Yes.
I thought the performances in general were pretty bad.
Okay, Nick Nolte rules. I'm sorry. I think he is amazing because he is just going for it. When him and Bruce at the end, before he literally chews the scenery of the electrical wire to turn into the absorbing man, and Bruce is kind of hulking out without physically hulking out, and he just sits back down in his chair and just goes wah wah wah, is so A+. I feel like I'm watching like Shakespeare, like a play, like on screen.
That's what I have in my notes.
Yes.
I feel like I'm watching some bizarre, terrible theater performance.
And I live for this. I loved it personally.
Oh, I can't stand him. Oh, it's horrible. I had to put on the subtitles because of him. Oh.
Well, yeah, like I said before, he looks like he's made out of vodka, so that makes sense.
I wonder if he even asked that, like when they hired him, like, do you need me to be drunk for the role? I can do it.
Do you think he even knew what movie he was in?
No chance.
There is no way at all. But
no,
honestly,
he may have been familiar with the TV series, but no idea. When your main villain's a janitor, it's like, what do you do with that?
Again, though, it's just fantastic because, Bruce is dealing with like Nick Nolte, who just like sees him as, again, like, a variable in his experiments and not a human being. So he's just like looking at this guy like, you loser kid, wow, wow, wow. And just in classic like Nick Nolte quote gravitas, it makes me laugh. And honestly, I'm here for it.
The next time you watch this film,
which is never.
Well, if you do, all the listeners, if you watch this film again, pay attention to how short Nick Nolte is. And those dogs are about half his size.
Did not catch that.
I did not catch it either.
Hollywood making short people look tall since the beginning.
They can't hide it in every shot. I can tell you that. Look, Eric Bana is the main character. I like him as an actor. I like him in Troy. I really liked him in Munich. I liked him in Star Trek. I do not think he was the right choice for Bruce Banner. There is a distinct lack of charisma, and most importantly, he's simply not believable as a scientist.
Yeah, I agree with that.
There was just, at no point did I believe he knew how to work a computer, let alone gamma rays.
Let alone read.
Yeah.
Eric Bana, I want to know if that's kind of what the direction was. I mean, yeah, like Bruce Banner is always presented as kind of like a meek, reclusive person who is emotionally stunted and always is trying to hide his emotions as well. But Bana just comes off as like aloof and bored, if that makes sense.
Like he was bored on set.
Well, yeah, and it clearly shows, but it's not even like he's like actively disinterested to like, you know, kind of keep his anger at bay. And you don't really see a lot of that temper or anger just in general, which we know Bruce Banner, comics, TV shows, what have you, that was always like a little characteristic that he could snap or be a little irritable too. You don't really get a lot of that in this movie either. So it's just a really muted performance.
You didn't get that from Edward Norton. You got that with Ruffalo. Ruffalo did a really good job of, especially in the first Avengers, of playing everything on edge. And one of my favorite scenes in the Avengers is, again, it's just such a well-written film. If you recall, it's pretty short, but there's a scene when him and Tony are talking about, I think, Loki's scepter. They're on the helicarrier, and they end up talking about something involving physics. I don't know what, but whatever. And it was such a nice scene because you're like, oh, two scientists actually talking about scientific stuff.
It's great. And then when he grabs that scepter and everyone's looking at him like, you need to chill out right now. Like everyone looks so on edge. You are so right. Oh, and I want to make another digression because we talked about Zach Penn before. Zach Penn, who also has a story credit on Avengers, but when Joss Whedon read his draft, he was like, this is pretty terrible, and pretty much threw it all out. Ed Norton basically rewrote all of Zach Penn's script for The Incredible Hulk. Zach Penn's script did not get picked for this Hulk. That guy, that's 3 strikes and you're out with Hulk, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, maybe pick a different character.
Maybe, just pick any other lane, man, not the Hulk one.
Anton, what'd you think of Bana?
I totally agree with the both of you. You know, this is something I told you before. You know, I texted you this before the recording. There's a bit of a stereotypical look to how some of these, lack of a better word, how these science nerds looked in Marvel Comics, right? They're pretty frail, glasses. And what that helped with in the story, of course, is emphasize their transformation. And that's not the kind of scientist that we get here. Of course, it's up to the director on how they want to be able to convey the transformation here. But I just don't think Eric Bana really sold like this is the transformation from like a meek Bruce Banner into the Hulk.
I agree with that wholeheartedly.
I like Jennifer Connelly.
I love Jennifer Connelly. She could just do nothing.
That's great.
Yeah, I think she was trying. She seems to genuinely care for Bruce. Semi-believable.
Betty Ross is just such a marginalized character, though.
There's a reason they got rid of her eventually.
She is allegedly coming back in the next Captain America movie, but you didn't hear that from me.
I remember seeing that. I mean, even in the film, though, Betty Ross was pretty important as the only force that calmed down the Hulk, right? And so that's a very important relationship in the film. And I think, you know, Jennifer Connelly did a good job of portraying Betty Ross in that sense.
She's kind of the main character for a lot of this movie, too. Like her relationship with her father, Sam Elliott, too. Like that's pretty much like at the forefront and meant to be like a parallel to, you know, Bruce's own familial trauma. And we get the idea that she chases men like her father, distance, a la Bruce Banner, controlling, a la Talbot, too. So it really is like a Betty Ross performance with more to do. So again, it's Jennifer Connelly and she's great in everything she's in, but she does a lot more than what she's given. But at least this movie tries to make Betty Ross, you know, a real character, which I don't think the 2008 Incredible Hulk does in the slightest.
I'm glad you mentioned her father. He's the only character with an iota of charisma.
God,
Sam Elliott
rules.
Yeah,
Sam Elliott.
Yeah, he's good. He's good in this. It's a shame they didn't keep him around. Nothing against William Hurt, but I do like Sam Elliott as Thunderbolt Ross.
Honestly, that mustache is like so just like straight on his face. I know we usually get, more of a twirled mustache, but I'm like, and this is coming from somebody who literally cannot grow even a single shred of facial hair too, which is, you're welcome, all the listeners, now knowing that about me. But that mustache is so well manicured. I'm like, so well groomed. I'm like, you know what? Good job. Good job. Just great job, costume designer, keeping that.
It's the second best mustache he's ever had.
Number one
I give number one to Tombstone.
Yes.
Oh, I was going to say number one was going to go to Roadhouse, but you're right.
Oh, whoa. Roadhouse is on that list.
Yeah.
Does he ever not have a mustache?
Maybe that's a good question.
I'm so tempted to go through his entire filmography after this and just watch every movie just to like say.
I'm trying
to
think. I can't picture him without a mustache at this point.
Yeah,
that would scare me.
So despite other performances not being so great in the film, I will say, totally agree. This is on par with just William H. Macy as J. Jonah Jameson.
You mean
J.K. Simmons?
Sorry, J.K. Simmons. My bad.
I'm like, William H. Macy as J. Jonah Jameson.
Like, whoa, buddy!
Subversive, like submissive man. I was like, ooh, that could be fun. We'll play on the character.
Very different. My bad.
Very different.
William H. Macy, great actor though.
Great actor. I will say, Thunderbolt Ross in this character too. I appreciate how he's not such a mustache twirling villain like the William Hurt character really is in the MCU movies too, where he's just like, Hulk is the worst, blow him up, I hate him. Obviously in this, yes, he is like, yeah, we should experiment on him, and some super soldiers would be pretty nifty, but he's clearly incensed at Josh Lucas's Major Talbot's actions too, and is kind of sympathetic to Bruce and Betty. So I kind of appreciate that they mine the character a little bit more than just that very much like objectively like objective foe to Bruce Banner like he usually is portrayed as.
Yeah, I mean, there's just not a lot of other characters, right? Like the only other major character in the film is Glenn Talbot, played by Josh Lucas, who stinks. I mean, he might as well be made of cardboard. He's just one of the most one-dimensional used car salesman types that's ever been in one of these movies. It would have been better off if he wasn't in it.
It really is like that he was put on screen to make the audience hate him. Like, he's not the villain by any means. He's clearly a secondary villain.
Right.
But he is just like, when he takes out the comically large needle while the Hulk is in the foam and his death scene happens, that's mustache twirling right there.
I mean, it's one of the biggest flaws with this film. Just there's not a big cast, right? Almost none of them, other than Sam Elliott, have any charisma. And the two villains, one of them is a janitor, the other one is basically a car salesman. That's it. That's your $138 million Hulk movie. That's the best they could come up with after 15 drafts of the screenplay and 9 different writers. That's the best they could do.
Which, again, like, I think sadly, it was not received well, but I think a very on purpose decision of how do I continue, or from Ang Lee on, how do I push forward the relationship between like David and Bruce. Like that was really kind of like his end goal. I'm like, okay, maybe I can make David a fart cloud, and maybe that's a good idea. And clearly it wasn't. But I mean, compare that to what was the course correction, 2008's the Hulk, or Incredible Hulk. They just went with what is kind of the trope now, is just the hero, but the anti version of which is the Abomination, which is more safe.
Did you kind of catch it when Nick Nolte is like transforming for the first time and his skin is kind of changing with the absorbing man powers? He kind of has that scaly lizard looking arm in the beginning. It's almost like they kind of tease out the Abomination in that sense. And it's kind of like, would this movie have been better if, they did the foil and they go the Abomination route?
Yep.
I think it would have been. They never bring up the scaly skin again, really.
Right. The lizards just go away, even though that's basically all we talk about for the first 20 minutes of this film.
Lizards give me nightmares.
Yeah, lizards are Generation Starfish, and all you get is like Hulk healing a cut in one like quick cut at the end of the movie. Is right too. Also, is Josh Lucas extra evil because he has frosted tips? And follow-up question, did either of you have frosted tips in 2003?
I did not.
Yes and no.
And just to clarify, that's no, you did not have frosted tips, right?
No, I did not.
Did not.
Well, you guys were normal.
My mom talked me out of it. I wanted them.
I did not have a puka
One
shell
point.
necklace.
My brother, he wore a puka shell necklace and he frosted his tips. I, as a very blonde child, did neither, and it was very fun laughing at him as a kid. And I will never let him forget that. And now we have it literally on the record too that he used to do that.
Did you have a Von Dutch T-shirt?
Dude, I had a Von Dutch hat.
Oh, even better.
So you're telling us you were a cool kid.
I wore a white studded belt for like 3 years to school every day. With like double Lacoste polos and like boot cut.
Did you have matching Oakleys?
No, I did not have Oakleys, but I did spike my hair to the heavens with some gotta be glued. Me during the time of Hulk, tough time. But puberty did me good, I guess.
Well, we talked about Ang Lee. We talked about this film being boring. We talked about the problem with the Hulk. And lastly, we talked about the performances. Is there anything that we want to add before we wrap this up?
I think I'm ready to dive in. Did we like it?
All right. Garret, you are the guest. Would you like to go first and render your verdict?
I think I am. So, when I was told we were doing this movie, I was very excited. I was like, you know what? This movie was ahead of its time. It's misunderstood. It's got so many elements I remember thinking were great. An awesome video game, too, like I said before. And then watching it, let's just say my excitement waned very quickly, very fast. There are definitely some elements I like. I talked about before. I'm a big fan personally of the comic panel editing and really wish they actually committed to it too. I think some of the acting, especially Nick Nolte, is just awesome in this, and Sam Elliott especially too. I think Ang Lee really took a shot on this, and it was something we hadn't seen and probably won't see in movies, but just the execution isn't there. The CGI is very 2003. The villains are basically non-existent, and some of the performances, like we talked about, are just so muted too. So as much as I would love to give this a very positive review, I'm giving this a big fat C.
Anton,
just in case,
struggling with the dog.
He heard another dog outside, so
he heard about the Hulk dogs and he was like, I am not letting these losers step into my territory.
He's like, I auditioned for that role, I didn't get it, let me tell you about it.
Wait, Garret, so you like this better than League of Extraordinary Gentlemen?
Yes. What did I give League of Extraordinary Gentlemen? I feel like I gave that a C-, did I not?
Yeah, you did. It was C-, yeah.
Yes, so this is a C. I like it better than League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and also because League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, that hide is much worse looking than this Hulk. So as far as big CGI creatures go, slight improvement here. Very slight, but that is not endorsement.
Yeah, maybe Pat, if you can go. Sorry, I need to.
Okay, yeah, sure. Okay. Rotten Tomatoes website consensus reads, quote, while Ang Lee's ambitious film earns marks for its style and an attempt at dramatic depth, there's ultimately too much talking and not enough smashing, end quote.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned this in the prologue that I had never seen this all the way through before until basically about a week ago. And then earlier this morning, I attempted to give it another rewatch, and I will admit I used a lot of the 1.5 speed for some of the scenes. This film is long. It's very slowly paced. The performances are, I would say, less than mediocre. A lot of the visuals are just weird without being particularly memorable. At certain points, I thought the visuals were intended to be a joke. I certainly respect Ang Lee's ambition, but I think his melodramatic art house approach was very, very misguided. This is the story of a giant green monster who smashes things, or at least it should have been, and we got some of that. And then worst of all, this film is boring. I don't really know what the plot is. The most interesting villain is a janitor, and there's really no tension in any of the scenes. It's a gigantic swing and a miss. It's a very misunderstood movie, but I think it is also a very, very bad one. Its poor reputation is deserved. At no point during this 138-minute runtime was I happy to be watching it. I checked my watch at least a dozen times. I considered shutting it off 3 or 4 different times. Looking at the sum of its parts, there's not a single thing about it that I enjoyed. It's one of the toughest watches I've ever done. Ang Lee should have one of his Oscars taken away for this steaming pile of shit. This is an F.
Wow.
This is actually one of the worst films I've ever seen in recent times.
Oh, wow, that is. Wow.
Well, I'm just going through the checklist. I'm like, okay, is it well acted? No. Is it exciting? No. Is it well written? No. Are the visuals good? Not really. Is it well paced? Not at all. How's the score? Inappropriately awful.
I'm with you. You know what? I'm not with you because obviously I give it a C, but I understand exactly where you're coming from. So I get it. I totally understand those, like, if you want to call them criticisms.
Yeah, and you know, we are all listeners. We're always you're always entitled to your own opinion, and we respect that here at Why Wasn't It Better? Huey, even yours too. So thank you, Pat. You know, I just want to first. Dang it! Sorry, he's really going off.
He's going at it today.
Something's really pissing him off outside.
I'm telling you, that poodle, whatever her name was, Lily, she's sitting there staring.
It's your new janitor neighbor, Anton. You didn't know?
Yeah, it's your new drunk janitor neighbor.
Dang it, Nick Nolte moved in next door. All right, seems like he's calmed down for a sec. You know, we threw around a lot of words pretty frequently throughout the episode. Ambitious is the one that comes to mind when I think of Ang Lee's Hulk. And while I don't disagree, Pat, that it wasn't the best acting at all, the pacing was a bit slow. It definitely was very boring at parts. There was, to me, I think a lot of merit when it comes to the very decisive directorial choices in terms of how Ang Lee chose to tell a Hulk story. And with that, it's truly an origin of Bruce Banner, not an origin of the Hulk, because of course it's always very clear it's a gamma radiation created the Hulk. How is that manifested from the origin of Bruce Banner? And so that's a very ambitious story. It's a very dark story. It's a very difficult story to tell. And with that, I think, like, if you think of it from in terms of a very art house or very non-conventional superhero film, Ang Lee really commits to telling that story and the importance, and to him, the importance of telling the story between the relationship of father and child. How does that rage and inner turmoil kind of manifest into rage today, as well as how does it impact our current relationships? And I think that it was an Ang Lee movie through and through. And with that, I think I always will give points when there are directors that have really taken a stand on trying to take, like, a medium or a style, or really even taking a movie and trying to transcend it to more than what typically people think may be. So while a traditional superhero film it is not, there was attempts to really tell a deeper story, and I think that for me that really resonated, that there was great intent with that. So that, along with Thunderbolt Ross, so just kind of very small, a small little kudos for at least that acting credit. I think that this film does have some merit in that there are so many superhero films now that kind of fit a more cookie cutter mold, but Hulk is a bit more ambitious in trying to really tell a nuanced and deep story that is difficult, and I don't think a lot of directors will take on. But Ang Lee did. It may have failed, but I do think this kind of film has an audience, and at least, you know, it does for me. I wouldn't mind watching this film again. I'm at a D.
Wow, I am like positivity with this film comparatively.
Yeah, that's generous.
Yeah.
This movie is a disaster. I wasn't ready for this.
Meanwhile, I'm like, yeah, it's fine. I appreciated some of the quality. Some parts got me going. You're like, no.
Well, I'm just, I don't think I'm a Hulk fan. I'm not. The other one, we're going to review the next Hulk film. I don't like that one either.
I cannot wait to hear what you guys think about that one in comparison to this too.
Well, I'll spoil it a little bit for you. I think it's a better movie than this.
I feel like you can only go up after an F, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, not much. Let me just say, I didn't enjoy it. I'll tell you that.
Oh, man. That's good. You're getting me good today.
Yeah, Edward Norton, I don't know what was going on there.
Oh yeah, he had an ego trip, that's for sure. His ego is bigger than the mushroom cloud that Nick Nolte turned into at the end of this movie.
I will say in slight defense of Edward Norton, he never phones anything in. At least he cares.
That is very true. I agree
He
with that.
does care about the material, and I have to give him props for that.
That is fair. That is totally fair.
And Edward Norton's caring also crossovers to influence on screenplay writing and basically everything else on set.
Not in a great way.
But the man cares.
He does care. He does. Too much? Debatable.
Yeah, that's.
We'll find out next week on Why Wasn't It Better.
Ed Norton definitely says, he's like, one of my biggest weaknesses is I just care too much, like in an interview. Like he would say the line like that, and I'd be like, get out of here. We're not hiring you.
He would say that.
He totally would.
They basically fired him.
Yeah.
That's an understatement.
Kind of all you need to know. That movie also didn't make any money, so that doesn't help. But that is it for 2003's Hulk. Next week we will be covering The Incredible Hulk, because we just pointed out. Garrett, thank you so much for joining us again. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Garrett.
Hey, thank you guys. Always happy to talk, share some feelings, talk about, all of Shakespeare dramas and superhero films too. And I can't wait to be on with you guys, hopefully soon, and love the work that you guys are doing, and can't wait to listen to the next episode too.
Thank you. Yeah, we're going to have you back soon. Iron Man 3 will be the episode you are appearing on.
Oh, let me tell you about one of my favorite movies. I'm going to have a blast. You thought I was a positive person today? Oh my God, it's going to be Sunshine and Rainbows.
I can't wait.
I can't wait for that. Oh, so excited.
Yeah, we'll throw something on the calendar. We're at this point we're recording these so far in advance. Like this episode won't debut for probably a month at least.
Oh my God, my hair might be gray by then.
You can always frost the tips.
I could have frosted tips. Exactly.
All right, everyone. Well, that is it for this week's edition of Why Wasn't It Better? We will see you next time. And until then, take care.